I'm going to bring in Trader A co-founder Ayesha Tariq. And Ayesha, $1 trillion in deposits taken out of banks in the past year since the Fed started this rate hiking cycle. It sort of went undercover. No one talked about it. Very few people raised red flags. I know every time I brought up the subject, I was kind of brushed off. Now, initially, the move was from larger banks into smaller banks. Now it's in smaller banks. But it's pretty clear, right? The government would be willing to bail out these large banks. And I want to ask you, with that as the backdrop and the trends that we're seeing, I know the FDIC is coming out saying, hey, there's a trickle of money being transferred, but it feels to me that they've left these smaller banks out on a lurch.
Good afternoon, Charles. Thank you for having me back, first of all. So to a large extent, these smaller banks, they're slightly better off, though, because some of their deposits, or rather the majority of their deposits, are below the $250,000 threshold, which means that they do have a higher proportion of deposits insured. But, you know, you've rightly pointed out that the major outflows have still been from these smaller banks. And part of that is because they're going into these, liquid market funds, which, treasuries that are yielding over 4%. And just as Lance said, why would you want to put your money there? So I think the banks are not, really being left to their own devices. But I think the Fed has stepped in a little bit to give them some time, to buy them some time, while they manage their books, manage the liquidity on their books. And they have to do that now. So they have to raise their deposit rates. They have to attract more deposits.
Right.
And this temporary funding facility can help them, buy that time.
So, Lance just talked about the exposure to commercial real estate. I think we've all kind of seen that, these mortgage-backed securities. Here's an interesting thing, though, right? Mortgage-backed securities, commercial real estate. A recent paper from New York University had a great line, right, that because we're using these numbers in 100 billion, 690 billion, they're saying when you add it all up, there might have been unrealized losses of $1.7 trillion. I mean, that's the sword of Damocles hanging over this economy and this market, and very few people are really talking about it.
No, absolutely. I think commercial real estate is a wild card right now. I think this 1.7 trillion in exposure is a difficult number because we have, and of this 1.7 trillion in exposure, about 1.1 trillion is maturing this year and next year. So yes, this definitely presents a problem because we don't know if these companies can pay up. We've already started seeing some defaults out, in California,
right,
and some of the bigger, like Blackstone and a few other companies also having problems. So I think this is where office properties specifically are concerned. You have the issue of people not wanting to come back to offices.
Right.
So offices are downsizing. So you have depressed rentals over there.
Let me jump in because we got less than a minute. And I want to ask you two more questions. First, about the contagion.
Sure.
I mean, how do we know how many banks are exposed to these, to these commercial, these commercial real estate? It obviously played a role with Silicon Valley Bank. So should we be concerned, or will it be an isolated event? And then also, while you're at it, how are you investing through all of this?
So I think Silicon Valley was a little bit of an isolated incident because they were poorly managed. They didn't manage their books very well. Having said that, the commercial real estate part is still a difficult part to get through, and I think we need to be a little bit more careful. So I am staying away from the regional banks for now because we don't know how much of this exposure exists with which bank. We can look at the financials, but banks are hard to read, right? And there may be a lot of stress among these banks for now. But having said that, I think it will work out. We need the next 2 to 3 months to see how these banks stabilize, given the Fed's funding and everything else, before we can try to put our money in the regional banks.
All right. Well, let's leave it there, Ayesha. Thanks a lot. No, always great work. Appreciate it.